everyone. It's really great to have this conversation again after a long time and a lot of discussion. And I think the community has been waiting for this moment for a long time. So it's great to be here with Christian Rao from Mastercard. If you want to maybe share some thoughts on a bit your background or your ideas and views, and then we'll probably share something quite exciting with the community that I'm sure you've probably seen. They reacted quite positive too, but quite curious to share a bit with the community.
Yeah, pleasure. But before I do that, let me congratulate you to that event. I mean, I've been here today. I've watched the sort of review online yesterday. I was super impressed, and I think what you pulled together, really great. Paired with the rebranding, absolutely impressed. So, and yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you.
And I'm not the first one to say that, right? I'm not the first one to notice. Yeah, my name is Christian. I work for Mastercard, have been doing this for 10 years in various functions, now heading a function that we call FinTech Enablement and Crypto, which basically, and we'll get to that, should put us in a position to make us a very, let's say, easy to work with partner for companies such as Elrond or MultiversX, but at the same time bring to the table what we have been doing for 60 years almost in terms of enabling payments throughout the world in whatever shape or form. Mastercard, I think, is a well-known company. What is important to know is that we don't give out cards. So there's roughly 2.7 billion cards out there, but none of these come from us. It's banks in the past, and nowadays more fintechs, and in the future even more crypto players that do issue...
Another card.
It's beautiful, it's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's important. So we are not a B2C company, we are a B2B company. So we work with banks on the one hand side, or financial institutions, and we work with other banks that sit behind merchants, basically, and accept payments. And we're enabling the flow of this in a very seamless manner. So just to give you a feeling, in the calendar year 2021, we processed 7.7 trillion USD in volume. So that's roughly 2 times German GDP. And I think moving money from one end to the other is, I don't want to call it trivial, but I think the beauty is that we make sure that every Peruvian Mastercard can buy something in Mongolia at the point of sale or in e-com, and if something should go wrong, we have sort of a rule set to also rewind this and make everybody whole again. And that's also sort of the essence of what we want to do. We want to enable people to make safe, simple, secure payments wherever they want. In the past, that was, in a taxi, you would put in your plastic card, you would go, and then it was more and more, the magnetic stripe and the chip. And then at one point, 8 years ago, Apple Pay came along, and we really started to discard that physical form factor of a plastic card, but put a token on your iPhone. To the extent that in some European markets, we see that 30% of all the point of sales, so the stationary retail sales, are already initiated by devices other than plastic cards. And I think that's why we also don't like to be a card company, because we see that let's say that medium of a plastic card has a deadline to it, right? But the network connecting these 2.8 billion consumers with the merchants and that rules and making this all work fairly smooth. I think that's really sort of the secret source or the magic that we want to transpose, obviously, also into crypto.
That's actually a very, very interesting conversation, and we'll probably also try to dive deep a bit into how Mastercard started. But before doing that, I think a great conversation to have is around the progress that we've made, and the community in some sense knows that we've been working on a card for a long time, but we've tried to always find solutions that are not only announced and then they don't work, but rather solutions that we could build for the future. And so even in these conversations, that there have been a lot of conversations. I remember that we discussed it in some form or another 1 year ago. Some conversations were started with Mastercard and so forth. But we're now thrilled to say that the card that we release with Exportal is done in partnership with Mastercard. So this is an amazing milestone that we can share, and we could not be more excited to share this with the community.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Now, perhaps a good conversation would be a bit how Mastercard sees at this point the crypto space, some of the things that are happening, how you specifically see a collaboration with Elrond and now MultiversX, and how this then maybe also plays out and you look at it, applying it to the new mediums, the metaverse and beyond.
Absolutely. Before answering that question, I think one thing we have to all be aware of, and that will resonate. Nobody wants to pay, right? People want to consume services, they want to buy things, and then they need to pay in one way or another, right? And we see that the way you drive a taxi or ride a taxi has changed because now you have an Uber. The way you consume movies has changed. Now you have Netflix. So a lot of value chains have been digitally disrupted and have also integrated payments into them in a very, let's say, frictionless manner. And whenever we speak about the multiverse and whatever that is, that means that people will interact differently consistently but differently in the digital world and the physical world, and not looking at how the world changes, the digital world, the physical world, how they converge, not looking at this from a party like Mastercard, would be reckless, basically, because we would risk of not being present and being disrupted. So that is why
totally agree.
that is why we look at these things, because we need to be. If you're not on the iPhone or on the Android device today, then the generation Alpha, whatever you want to call them, they will find other solutions. And why do we look at crypto today? So there's one tactical thing. Just as consumers wanted to buy MP3s 20 years back, right, and was cumbersome, you download a single song, you put it on a hard drive, on a stick or whatever, before the iPod came around. People want to buy crypto if they don't get it on-chain natively. So they need to move their fiat funds on-chain, basically. And you can do this via ACH or wire transfer. You can do it via open banking to a certain extent, but we see that in many instances, cards are used for that. And they're well equipped for this, because at the end of the day, it's an e-com transaction. But then we also see at one point, multiverse and everything, we see the willingness of consumers to take the digital proceeds back into the quote-unquote real world, right? And their cards are a very, let's say, smooth and efficient way, because we can build on an infrastructure that's there, that's working on mobile devices, that's working on smartwatches. And we can use our technology and our role in the ecosystem to enable all these merchants to accept cards, such as the multiverse cards, without even thinking about, is this a e-gold card? Is this a Bitcoin card? Do I want to deal with this? Does my treasury and my accounting and my tax people, do they know how to deal with this? No, they don't have to, right? The consumer uses a product that they associate very much with MultiversX. It's a physical manifestation of the MultiversX. But the merchant, right, the Carrefour just around here, they couldn't care less whether that's an HSBC or Citibank or whatever card or your card. It will work. And that's where we see an enormous opportunity, because we can really combine the old world, the TradFi, fiat, whatever you want to call it, world, with the new world. And we bring, and that's what we see our role is, we bring the rules and regulation that I think some of them have also a reason why in the multiverse world. We bring these to the crypto world and bring a bit of the innovation into the TradFi world. And that's why we engage in this space, and that's where I personally think the real magic will unfold. If you do crypto in this lane and fiat in this lane, and they never cross, then I think the world would be a boring place and there would be no cross-fertilization. I think it's for us jointly to bring these things together.
And I would also say that it's precisely this point of trying to blur the lines between worlds, trying to create a space where both types of money are equivalent, that are used in the same way, regardless of them coming from the metaverse or them being fiat money. This is the thing that will then open up a lot of other opportunities. To be able to do this, to be able to bridge this gap and recognize that, as you've mentioned, one, in the real world, in the physical world, there are already some payment rails. There are already some networks that are very much established in some sense. Of course, there's tremendous innovation, but then in this new world, there's an opportunity that's incomparable with everything that exists in the physical world, precisely because here people have not yet figured out many things. So whenever they discover an environment, create an environment to bring money in it, to exchange it, to be able to embed it in a natively digital way, I think opens up tremendous opportunity. And to be able to bridge this, I think, is a great conversation, because the value, suppose that you have $1 million in the metaverse, in the multiverse. The key point is, if that type of money exists only in the virtual world, it doesn't have too much value. When that money can be spent everywhere, anywhere you'd like, for your groceries, for the things you'd like, at that point, it becomes money. At that point, in your mind, there's literally no distinction between the fiat money that you can use to buy the stuff and this new type of money that you can finally use in the way that you'd expect. So we're quite excited to be able to make this step forward. And I'm also curious a bit, it's very easy to see, for instance, Mastercard as it is right now, with the entire infrastructure present in all the countries and so forth, and the entire history, because it did not appear overnight.
Yeah.
There's a very long history there of experimentation, trials, new reinvention, and so forth. So I'm curious if you might know how Mastercard essentially started and how it took off.
As you said, I think it's an entity that goes way back, and I mean, I know this is recorded, so I should be careful with our marketing and comms people. But to the very best of my knowledge, it started in such a way that there were in the US back in the 60s, I think it was early 60s, there were proprietary credit cards. So you would have a credit card from, I don't know, Crédit Mutuel. And then you want to go to a grocery shop, and then that grocery shop needs to accept a credit card from Crédit Mutuel. I have Crédit Agricole, so they would need to also accept Crédit Agricole. So there would be basically a sort of invincible number of end-to-end connections, because there was simply not interoperability that a card issued by one bank would be accepted by a merchant from their bank. And the idea was really to move to a hub and spoke system and say, okay, let's create an entity that basically ensures interoperability. So that's, I think, how the Mastercard came into being. And to the very best of my knowledge, the very first credit card is the diner's card. And the name should be very revealing, because I think it was a set of gentlemen that were having lunch or dinner in I think it was in New York in the 60s also, and they couldn't settle their bill. So basically they wrote on I think to make the story nice, should be napkin. So they wrote on a napkin, we don't have the money, but we signal with our name that we owe you $60 or whatever. And then they came back. And that's the Diners Club. And then I believe that's the first card. And so the idea was really, that's where cards came about. And then in the 80s, I think few people here in the audience will remember, debit cards, especially in Europe, played an important role in terms of cash logistics, because we moved away from where you were confined to bank opening hours, going into bank branch, a lady most of the time sitting behind 5-centimeter glass. You tell her your account number, she gives you back then D-Mark or a Lira or whatever. But we used ATMs, and their cards were really used. And then, especially during the pandemic, and I don't want to bore you with the Mastercard thinking, but especially during pandemic, we saw that even in cash-affine markets in Europe, such as Germany, such as Austria, for example, people switched from using their card to get cash to then put it into the cashier system of Aldi, who put it back in the bank. They used their card, right, because it's more efficient. You minimize physical contact and so on and so forth. And that's how the whole thing started. And again, I think Mastercard in its innovation approach is very much guided by how people shop, how people interact, and how the world gets more digital. Because we don't have the pouvoir, we don't have that emotional buy-in that other companies have. And we piggyback on these technologies, and we contribute our technology to make it safe, simple, and secure.
Mm-hmm. I think it's always fascinating to look at the stories, and then especially stories that have had 70 years lifetime. That's very rare. Most companies do not make it 10 years or 20 years. To see companies that have existed for 70 years is always super interesting. And the key thing that we've been trying to always look at is trying to boil down to the very fundamentals. Every single thing that we're doing, whether it's money and just thinking hard what money really is, and then trying to understand its potential utility, trying to understand how money could be reinvented or reimagined, and then also trying really hard to understand both new use cases, new things that could and can be done in a way that's native to the network, to the tools that we're building, but then also bridging this world that might be new with the world that's already working and in operation. So I'm curious, maybe if you've looked specifically at blockchains and what you believe might be a version of money that we'll use, let's say, on a day-to-day basis 10 years from now. If you would say the way that the financial system might work in 2030.
Okay.
How would you imagine that would look?
I think that's a very interesting question, because at this point we have a lot of, let's say, channel differentiation, especially in the e-com space. What do I mean? If I want to buy something on a web shop, I can do it via invoice, I can do it via PayPal, via Klarna, via debit card, credit card, and 5, 6 others. But all of this is pretty much euro denominated, or whatever currency I'm in. And I do believe that next to this, let's say, form factor flexibility, there will be choice, right? If I listen to the ECB, we will have a digital euro in 2026, which will basically be a physical manifestation of the fiat money that we have. I understand there's still some design choices to be made, but this will be there, right? Then I see on the partner side that we speak with, more and more of an interest to look at stable coins for payment, because stable coins basically allow for 365, 24/7 settlement without having the fluctuation associated with Bitcoin, for example. So there's interest for this. Then I'm a firm believer that fiat, be it card denominated or cash, will play a role. And I do believe at the end of the day, it will be for consumers to choose what they want. And of course, for merchants to guide them, to nudge them to the extent what they prefer. And I think having this choice is very much in the spirit of what we stand for and also what the regulator wants to see. I think in the panel before us, somebody mentioned something around PSD2 and opening up service competition on current accounts. And I think that is something that is very healthy for the industry, because I think that the more opportunities you open, the more you give choice to consumers and merchants, the more innovation you spur, if you at the same time provide regulatory guidance in terms of stability of value, consumer protection, and so on and so forth. Because I think that was also mentioned today, quite likely everybody here in the room feels very much comfortable with my keys, my coins in these, let me call it very crypto-native concepts, but a lot of people in the general public quite likely don't. So I think that these choices need to be accompanied by, let's say, boundaries or let me call it protective boundaries for the general public.
Do you see Mastercard moving much closer and adopting either deeper blockchain integrations, different deeper applications that you're experimenting with?
Yeah, absolutely. So up until now, we've been, let me call it, or up until recently, to be more precise, we've been a card company. Card, not in terms of the plastic, but these blocks of 4 numbers. And then some years back, we bought a company called Vocalink that in the UK processes basically the ACH money, because we said we want to be on these rails too. And now we look very much at blockchain also. We have a pilot, for example, for stablecoin settlement in the US going on with Paxos. And we also recently announced another partnership where we want to enable banks to offer blockchain basically, or let me call it digital assets as a service through a partnership with Mastercard, because we see that also here we can bring this to the table. So we definitely want to play in this space because we believe in the underlying technical capabilities and the innovative capacity. And we always do this cross-referencing. I touched upon it: consumer protection, regulatory oversight, and stability of value. And it's, for us, it's a journey, right? To see what can we do, what can't we do, what resonates with the market. But it's definitely a spot that we spend a lot of time looking at. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job.
I'm curious if you take a look at the current space, at the things that are developing, at the way that the Metaverse, Web3, and so forth are emerging. What would you say might be one of the most important strategic moves that would change the space in terms of adoption, in terms of speed of adoption or openness to the public?
I would think that on the multiverses, metaverses, I think openness and interoperability for me quite likely would be key. Because if I see myself in a multiverse that delivers, let's say, a relevant use case for myself, and I need to pay or get paid or whatever, I quite likely would not want to be confined to using a proprietary token only of this multiverse or metaverse. I would want to walk around, let's say, and I want to buy something. I would want to use my Apple Watch on my avatar, and then I would want to use, my real-life Apple Watch to authenticate myself with my physically. And I think that is something that I would hope for. It's more a hope than something that I can affect. But that the people that build these multiverses, metaverses, that they look at this seamlessness, this interoperability, because as you said, right, I have $1 million in Multiverse X. If I can't get it to Multiverse Z or Y, the utility is limited, and I think also adoption will be limited, because at the end of the day, I believe the ultimate litmus test will be, can I get it to the real world to buy my groceries if I need to? I mean, that's what it really boils down to. You can, if you're really serious about it, you can have funny money for the multiverse. But if this is really money I take seriously, I think that will always be the question: could I use this to buy my rent or my food tomorrow? And I think if multiverses are serious about really being embedded in the user's life, quite likely that would be a strategic North Star, whatever you want to call it, that I would be looking at.
Mhm. I'm always surprised how fast these things evolve and how fast some forms of money then can immediately change. And things that have been used for tens or hundreds of years then become so foreign because new generations have other tools and with them other habits and so forth. I'm curious if you would think about, because there's almost an unstated, let's say, challenge here that whoever in the world can find a simpler, more frictionless version of encoding money and then giving it to the users, that will in some form or another eventually win out, and that's in some form or another what Mastercard is trying to do. This is what blockchains are trying to do and are bringing huge improvements to the market. Now, I'm curious if you would say there's one particular threat that if we don't wake up to or don't embed or don't anticipate or address, it might challenge even very, very large companies and put them in a position where they'd have to rethink their strategy. If you'd say what that might be in the next 5 or 10 years for Mastercard, what would you say could be on the list?
I think not taking these digitization developments serious enough could be something. So we don't want to be a company that says, okay, NFTs are not important or nobody's going to use them. So I think keeping an open eye in a positive sense, being paranoid of what could disrupt your business, and also making sure that you find the right partners without betraying your roots. What do I mean? Nowadays, Apple, to take a very graphical example, together with Goldman Sachs, they offer a card in the US. It's pretty successful. Of course, it's a competitor to classical high street banks, right? Also, Amazon. If you look at Amazon, they quite likely, if you look at all the services lined up next to them, there will be very few white spots that a normal quote-unquote bank doesn't cover. Also, PayPal issues nowadays Mastercard, and because they have a banking license. So we partner with these players because we believe that they deliver value to consumers, to the ecosystem, to merchants, and they play by the rules. So we should allow them. And we also, that's why we see Apple Pay. That's why these things work. And I think having this openness towards new partners, towards new use cases, to also question your role in the ecosystem and say, do we need to adjust? I think this is paramount. But then again, staying true to these fundamentals, as you also said. And for us, we say we leverage our technology to allow people to make safe, simple, secure payments wherever they want. And this is reasonably broad enough to always look at this mission statement and see, does that still hold true in a metaverse world? Does that still hold true everywhere? And I would say that's a healthy exercise that quite likely I would ask us to continue doing.
That's a great overview. I would say that we're now in a position where, as we began, it's remarkable to move past the conversations that we've seen in the previous years, where, let's say, governments, then payments, money institutions, and so forth have been very reluctant, partly because they did not play with the technologies, they did not understand technologies, and so forth, and partly because it was not yet time, precisely because of this understanding and this time needed for them to start making sense, start establishing some rules. Now, I do see that there's a tremendous opportunity and great openness for governments that we've had discussions and for institutions from all over the world. It's been great to have the Minister of France, the Minister of Romania participate in the conversations and state not only their openness but also support in seeing innovation move forward. And maybe a really great thought to end with is, and then perhaps I'll let you share something on this front, is it's at the end of the day our focus to improve people's lives, whether it's through money that they use, that they need to use throughout the world in the digital spaces, but also in the real world. And to do this through several products and several layers that we've built. Now, it's great to share this vision and to share these milestones with companies like Mastercard to bring a card and share it with the users. And we could not be more excited to push toward that goal. I'm curious maybe if you have some thoughts around milestones with cards and other things that you might look like for in explorations or in collaborations, especially with blockchain or metaverse companies.
So let me try to confine myself to the forward-looking statement, because otherwise, I'll bore everyone with the Mastercard history of all the great things we did. Now, I think continuing to let go of this plastic form factor, leveraging the technology of tokenization, be it on watches, on smartphones, on computers, that adds convenience and security, because we can get better user experience. You don't need to enter 16-digit card numbers, and you still have a better security still. So I think this is something using the technology that will be quite likely. I wouldn't call it a milestone. I think it should be a process, right? To constantly see what technologies are supported or endorsed by consumers and hold the technical capabilities to sustain payment use cases as to our security standards. And then again, unlock new payment flows. We tend to, and I myself, because it's most easiest to relate to, we tend to focus on consumer-to-merchant payments or consumer-to-consumer payments. You invite me for dinner, I want to pay you back, so I give you 50%. But there's so many other use cases, government disbursements, looking at governments. There's so much to do on financial inclusion. Without going into detail, in the year 2020, Mastercard we committed ourselves to move 1 billion consumers into the digital banking payment space by the year 2025, because and it quite likely justifies a discussion of its own, because we see that financial exclusion, prohibits people from building up a stock of capital for providing to their family. And I think there we can use a lot of our technology and a lot of our partnerships to render financial services inclusion in geographies and societies that quite likely don't have the same setup as we have or we benefit from in Europe. And that is something that I think we should also be looking at, and that we are looking at. So basically, how do we use our technology, our partnerships beyond, this, let's say, happy place where everybody has an Android device or an iPhone device and there's no financial exclusion. So that, I think, would be next to the technology element, touching the lives of people that don't have the benefit of let's say, good access to financial services is something that we should look at.
I think that we've had great conversation on things. We've started with Elrond precisely with this vision of not only trying to create the fundamentals for a new type of financial system, but also one that is open and accessible to sort of anyone in the world. Now, we've made quite some progress on that, and it's been great sharing the conversation with you. It's great to be able to push toward releasing the card, and thanks a lot for being with us, present, and looking forward to continue the conversation and progress.
And thanks again. Thanks to all of you, because I know MultiversX couldn't do it without all of you, and we really appreciate the trust and partnership from our end.
Thank you, Christian.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.